So, for a while now, I've been thinking about ideas for Yu-Gi-Oh related content on my channel. While I have done a few deck profiles in the past, they were only ever really experiments on my behalf. But now, after many hours of discussion with other Yu-Gi-Oh fans, I would like to present a new segment on my channel whose name took far too long to decide. Deck Dossier. In this series, we will be looking at specific decks throughout the game's history, how they work, what their strengths and weaknesses are, as well as looking at tech choices and other aspects of deck building that went into making it the deck that it ended up becoming. We will also follow through replays at the end of each video, highlighting the deck's playstyle, as well as how to counter certain plays and how to utilise the deck's cards to the best of their abilities. As you can tell from the title, and XA's amazing thumbnail Twitter in the description, check him out. This video in the series will be focused on my favourite archetype to come out since I rejoined the game about 5 years ago, that being pure Mekk-Knights. Hello. Oh, and him. He's an honorary Mekk-Knight. But anyway, on to the video. So, pausing the video real quick, I would just like to point out that the audio work for this video was done before the name Mekk-Knight was confirmed over Mekk-Knight in the TCG for these cards, despite them having literal audio jacks for hands. Additionally, some of the names don't match the images provided, as the images were downloaded before any official release of their TCG names, such as the image for Mekk-Knight of the Green Heights actually having the name Mekk-Knight of the Verdant Gale, or whatever it ends up being in the TCG. So please bear this in mind as we go forward. So in case you don't know, all Mekk-Knights have the same summoning clause in that once per turn per Mekk-Knight, if 2 or more cards are in the same column, they can be special summoned to the monster zone that's in that column. Please bear this in mind as we go through the monsters, as I won't be reading that part of their effects out. They can still be tribute summoned like any other level 5 or higher monster, but like... Ew. Starting with the lowest level first, we have Mekk-Knight of the Blue Sky. His effect is the following. If this card is normal or special summoned from the hand, you can add Mekk-Knight cards from your deck to your hand, except Mekk-Knight of the Blue Sky, equal to the number of the opponent's cards in the same column as this card. You can only use this effect once per turn. This is your main searcher, and a pretty damn good one at that. With you being able to potentially get 3 goddamn searches off this thing, usually including at least 1 Cobalt Depths and Crimson Lotus, this card gives a huge amount of versatility to the deck. This allows for other, more situational Mekk-Knights, such as Verdant Gale, to be run less since they can just be searched when needed, while also allowing more room for tech cards and draw power in the deck. This is a definite 3 of in any Mekk-Knight build. Next up is the aforementioned level 6, Mekk-Knight of the Verdant Gale. His effect is the following. When this card declares an attack on an opponent's monster in the same column, you can target 1 Mekk-Knight monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. Definitely one of the more situational Mekk-Knights. The return effect is okay, despite it contradicting the effects of Crimson Lotus and Golden Blossom, which we'll cover in a moment. Having only 2100 attack means it often won't be the strongest monster in the ballots fighting, which is another downside to the card. However, this guy does have some uses. For example, if you searched him off of Blue Sky, you would then be able to tribute Blue Sky in order to summon him, freeing up the space that Blue Sky was in, as well as potentially allowing for a rank 6, usually Utopia Beyond. For such a situational card, it does have its uses. You can run him at anywhere from none to 2, although I am currently running 2 in the testing build that I'm using. And that brings us to the other level 6 and the worst Mekk-Knight in my opinion, Mekk-Knight of the Amber Shade. A really fat level 6 with 3000 defense.
Hey, that's my physical appearance. That hurts really bad.
Its effect is that if an opponent's card in the same column as this card is destroyed by battle or leaves the field, you can special summon 1 Mekk-Knight monster from your hand. Now, this wouldn't actually be too bad if it didn't have 4 words in its effect, those being in this card's column. Why? Because all Mekk-Knight popping effects happen in the same column as the monster that is using the effect.
Oh wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Which will evidently not be the column that Amber Shade is in. Although this effect can be procced by battle, It's nearly useless, as by the time that this point comes around you should either be pushing for the OTK, or you should have all the Jack-Knights that you need on board anyway. Maybe run it as a one-off for the body and Utopia Beyond, but never any higher. Anyway, after the mess that was the level 6s, we get into the level 7s, and these are thankfully much better, starting with Crimson Lotus. With decent stats of 2300 attack and 2600 defense, he has the following effect. You can banish one Jack-Knight monster from your graveyard, then target one face-up monster in the same column as this card, destroy it. Now the key part about this and Golden Blossom's effect is that both of them are not once per turn, meaning that with a little bit of graveyard setup you're potentially popping 2 monsters with this guy when comboed with other cards, clearing the way for a quick OTK. While he won't be winning any practicality awards, like seriously look at the size of that axe, he's a definite 2 or 3 of in pure Jack-Knights and can help with rank 7 plays, which I'll discuss later. The other level 7 mentioned a couple times already is Jack-Knight of the Golden Blossom, and damn is she thick! Along with the standard summoning condition, her effect is that you can banish one Jack-Knight monster from your graveyard, then target one spell or trap card in the same column as this card, destroy it. Now this is particularly useful against Pendulum decks now that Master Rule 4 is out, meaning she can pop Scales to stop Pendulum summons, and that's almost always useful against Pendulum decks, except for Pendulum Magicians who just float into oblivion and I just want to destroy these fucking wizards and everything they stand for. She's good. Run at 2 or 3 in a pure build. Coming to the last 2 Jack-Knight main deck monsters, first up is Jack-Knight of the Lavender Dusk, your strongest Jack-Knight with 2500 attack. Quick effect. You can target one Jack-Knight monster you control, banish it until your next standby phase, and if you do, add one Jack-Knight monster from your deck to your hand except Jack-Knight of the Purple Dusk. You can only use this effect once per turn. Once again, this effect is pretty good. Bouncing on your opponent's turn can help in avoiding destruction effects, or getting lower attack monsters like Blue Sky or Verdant Gale off the field to avoid battling monsters, plus having them return during your next standby phase helps fuel the effects of the spell and trap lineup. Additionally, the Search serves the same purpose as Blue Sky, and allows for some extra deck toolboxing with the Jack-Knight levels if necessary. I personally run him at 3, but he can be dropped to 2 depending on your build. And this brings us to the single best monster in the entire lineup. Not only does this boy facilitate more summons, but it also boosts the effectiveness of your spell and traps blanketing negations thanks to his effect. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the deck's MVP, Jack-Knight of the Cobalt Depths. At level 8 that's 2400 both ways, this boy is fucking jacked. Like seriously, does munching on crawlers for breakfast make you massive or something? His effect is a once per turn quick effect, in that you can target one Jack-Knight monster you control and move that monster you control to another of your main monster zones. So it should be immediately evident that this boy is a 3-of staple in any Jack-Knight build. Having him in hand means at the very least 2 Jack-Knights on board at the end of the turn, but you're usually looking at 3 or 4, which helps immensely to fuel the effects of the spells and traps, which we'll get into in a sec. Being a trade-in target like Lavender Dusk and Grinder Golem helps immensely with the draw power that the deck desperately needs, in addition to setting up the grave for Crimson Lotus and Golden Blossom. If you aren't playing them at 3 guys, you're doing it wrong. Now before we get into the spell and traps I keep talking about, there's one more Jack-Knight that needs to be discussed. That being their Link monster, Jack-Knight of the World Scars. A Link 3, 3000 attack Cyverse type monster for some reason. His effect is as follows. While there are no other cards in the same column as this card, it can attack directly. Also, if this card in the extra monster zone does not point to a monster, it cannot be destroyed by card effects, also your opponent cannot target it with card effects. You can also send one other card you control in the same column as this card to the graveyard, special summon one Jack-Knight monster from your deck in defense position, and this effect can only be used once per turn. The direct attack effect has come in use more times than I can count, and while the defense summon effect is one that I've only really used a handful of times across extensive playtesting, The protection effect is the one I find most interesting, as it contradicts what the rest of the archetype is building towards with the swarming capabilities of the deck combined with the spell and trap effects. While definitely useful if in a pinch and in need of that protection, you'll often find yourself not going into him if you have at least 2 of your negation spells and traps already set up. I run him at 1 and that seems to work out fine. And now we come to the spells and traps, which, apart from the field spell, basically just give your opponent a massive middle finger and say fuck you to each and every one of their effects if that opponent's card is in the same column as a Jack-Knight monster.
Nice.
Let's start by looking at the field spell, Scars Caused by the World Legacy. Like any field spell these days, it would not be complete without the 300 stat boost effect both ways. But on top of that, this card actually works with the deck pretty well. Once per turn, you can discard 1 Jack-Knight monster or 1 World Legacy card, draw 1 card. You can banish 8 Jack-Knight monsters with different names from your graveyard and or face up side of your field, send all cards from your opponent's hand and extra deck to the graveyard. Ignoring the now basically impossible banishment effect, this, ladies and gentlemen, is what I like to call
Synergy.
The discard sets up the graveyard along with giving in-archetype draw power, which has helped me more times than I can count. Additionally, you can send unneeded World Legacy spells and traps, including itself, for this effect, or you can activate another copy of it in order to activate the effect again. I personally run 3 along with 2 or 3 terraforming, but I've seen some deck lists where it's only been played at 2 with no terrors, or not at all. To each their own. And now we come to the continuous spells and traps. Since they all have similar effects, I'm going to read them all side by side, with the 3 cards being Key to the World Legacy, Whisper of the World Legacy, and True Depths of the World Legacy. That lore though. All 3 of them have effects upon activation. Key allows you to return a banished Jack-Knight or World Legacy card, which is really good to recover cards banished by Lotus and Blossom. Whisper raises the attack of a level 5 or higher monster on the field by 1000 until the end of the turn, and True Depths summons a level 5 or higher from the grave, setting up your negation effects. Speaking strictly about the ignition effects, Key is the best for the aforementioned reasons, whereas True Depths is able to facilitate the negations and is often paired with the Cobalt Depths that I've discarded via trade-in, essentially turning the card into a bootleg Pot of Greed by nullifying the cost to draw. Whisper itself is more situational, but the amount of times it's come in useful is higher than I can count, so we're off to a good start as it is with these spells and traps. However, since that wasn't enough apparently, each one of the 3 is a secondary effect. All of them rely on a Jack-Knight being in the same column as the activated effect, which does mean hand traps and graveyard effects are unaffected, as shitty as that is. This fucking forehead haunts my dreams. Key negates any trap card or trap effect in the same column, whereas Whisper negates any spell, and True Depths negates any monster effect. More often than not, you'll be wishing to get True Depths for this effect alone, and my opponents have surrendered most of the time once 2 of these hit the field at the same time. Facing all 3 at once is almost guaranteed GG, and not something I would ever want to face myself. I personally run 3 of Key for the recovery and 2 of each of the traps, but this amount is definitely interchangeable depending on how well it facilitates your playstyle. And that's it. That's the entire archetype. I do hope in the future we get a link to Jack-Knight, since World Scars does say 2+ Jack-Knights, despite the fact that you can't actually summon him with only 2 Jack-Knights at the moment, but we'll see what happens when it comes to it. But for now, this means that it's time to discuss support cards, and I'm sure you all know what the first card is going to be. It's the card that has become the bane of many duelists' existence since the advent of the link mechanic. Placed high on the most likely card to be hit on the ban list betting table, we have Mr. Link 4 himself, Grinder Golem. For those of you who have been living under a rock since Lynx came out, his effect is that he cannot be normal summoned or set, and must first be special summoned from your hand to your opponent's side of the field by special summoning 2 level 1 Grinder tokens in face-up attack position to your field. If you special summon him, you cannot normal summon or set a monster during this turn. What this essentially means is that it can be bounced twice via Akashic Magician and Security Dragon before making Skaldiat with 4 materials, a combo which I'll show later for those who haven't seen it yet. By placing Grinder Golem in the same column as Skaldiat, you fill the summoning requirements for any Jack Knight, and with the Link 4's other effect to summon a monster from the hand once per turn, you can get 2 Jack Knights out on your first turn without any help from the opponent. In pure Jack Knights, Grinder Golem is usually the only non-Jack Knight monster you would run, although there are some tech choices that I'll get into later regarding main deck monster techs. So for now, let's move on to the extra deck. In order to pull off the Grinder Golem Skaldiat combo, the following cards are required. 1 Link Spider, 1 Link Karibo, 1 Akashic Magician, 1 Security Dragon, and finally 1 Skaldiat himself. Yes, this does take up a third of the extra deck, but pure Jack Knights will rarely want to use the extra deck beyond this combo aside from toolboxing, so that's really not an issue here. As for the rest of the extra deck, this really does come down to player preference, and as such, I'll quickly go through and list off my choices and reasons, but everyone's will be different. So if you want to read these cards fully, I suggest just pausing the video as needed, it's really up to you. Now personally, I run 1 extra Link Karibo beyond the Skaldiat combo, as it's come in use once again more times than I can count for another card I'll discuss in a moment. 1 Firewall Dragon, although this FTK machine isn't that useful here for once, and 1 Borrelo Dragon in order to get over bigger monsters with its battle phase effect to round off the Link monsters. As for the Xyz toolboxing that the deck is capable of, I run 1 Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon for sweet burn damage, often to complete no TK, number 11 Big Eye for obvious reasons, Photon Strikebouncer for negation and burn damage, which is really good, and finally Utopia Beyond to set all of your opponent's monsters' attacks to 0, something that I did showcase in the now rather outdated deck profile video. Now, the more astute viewers may be thinking, but Win, that's only 13 monsters. And you're right, that's because the final 2 slots go to a card that has recently come off the ban list, Millenniumized Restrict. Summoned off of Instant Fusion, this is a good second turn alternative to Skaldiat if you don't happen to draw into your Grinder Golem. This is because, thanks to its effects, you can equip a monster your opponent controls to it, thus creating yet another slot for a Jack Knight to be summoned to. Plus, once this summon has happened, Restrict can be used as material for Link Karibo, allowing you to attack once again as it circumvents Restrict's effect. Neat little combo, I reckon. One of the drawbacks of the Jack Knight archetype is the lack of an ability to search their spells and traps, barring World Armor as a tech choice. But this is where draw power comes in. Personally, I find 3 copies of Trade-In and 2 copies of Sacred Sword of 7 stars synergizes pretty well with the deck, as it gives them some much needed draws as well as setting up the graveyard while providing Key with some banished targets. And that's it, that's the entire deck. I'm currently experimenting with a card called Future Glow, a continuous spell that banishes a psychic type monster from your grave to boost all psychics on the field by its level times 200. More useful than I was expecting, as again it's a continuous spell, so Jack Knight synergy, and I'm currently running it at 3, and it's definitely an all 3 or nothing card. It's something to consider when making Jack Knights, and that also brings us to the third part of this video, tech choices. And since this video is already, nearly 18 minutes long, this is something I will cover quickly to get to the replays, as I don't want the video to drag for too long. Ignoring engines like the Kaiju engine or the Invoked, monsters that I've seen running or experimented with myself are cards like Silent Psychic Wizard and Psybeast. Silent Psychic Wizard banishes a psychic from the deck on summon, which you can then summon back when he leaves the field. Along with being a 1900 attack level 4, he aims in swarming the field on your second turn. Additionally, Psybeast can essentially become Xyz fodder while also setting up the banish zone for Key, and potentially allowing you to go into a number 42 Galaxy Tomahawk for some good old fashioned link spamming. On to spell and trap techs, cards like Psychic Path and Psychokinesis aid in recovery and destruction / burn damage, and then you also have traps like Psychic Overload for deck recovery and draw power, as well as Mind Over Matter for some of that sweet negation. Lastly come cards that help facilitate the Jack Knight summoning conditions. Before Cobalt Depths was revealed, Senate Switch was run at 3 by myself personally, and although nowadays it has been made a little bit redundant by the aforementioned Jack-Knight, it still does have a place in the deck if one wishes to use it. Additionally, there are cards such as Asport which can help move monsters on your opponent's turn, and while this helps aid the archetypal spell and trap effects, it's also rather situational in my opinion. A dead draw at worst and a solitary negation aid at best, I find it not worth running, but given the synergy with the deck, I figured it deserved to be mentioned here. There are also some other tech choices out there, such as Honest for battle protection and whatnot, but in all honesty they're few and far between, and cards that I've seen maybe once won't be covered in this video since, again, I've only ever seen them once in the extensive playtesting that I've done. But now, that leads us to the very last portion of this video, the replays. Take it away, me. Thank you, me. I have 4 replays to show with you this time, guys, each of which will show different aspects of the deck in their strengths and weaknesses. I'll be talking through play by play as we go, so let's have a look. The first duel here that we are going to have a look at is against ABCs. It's quite not a meta deck, so to speak, at the moment, but you know, it's up there. So we'll pause the video really quickly here, and you can see from this point here, as a Jack-Knight player, you've got to think, okay, what can they have that can stop my plays? Because one of the weaknesses of the deck is that they are very, very prone to interruption. If you are able to interrupt their plays, you're going to be able to beat them pretty easily. So here we've got to think, okay, they've got a face down, could be like a Solemn Strike or a Solemn Warning or something, and 3 cards in their hand. They may be hand traps, they may not be hand traps, but there's something they have to take into consideration. So we started off here with Blue Sky, or actually it is Blue Sky, this one. And the reason I decided to do that here was because we have 2 removal options in hand already. So even if it gets Solemn Striked or anything like that, that'll only just set up the grave for us to go through, and then that'll mean that at least one of the problems will be out of the way. As well, we have Instant Fusion in hand, which means we do have monster removal ready to go. And this, in case you are a bit confused, this is the image that YGO Pro 2 uses if you don't have the card image. I do have the card image in the files, but for whatever reason it doesn't seem to recognize it. So if you see that during the replays, that's what's going on. So let's just continue it here. You see here we get our 2 searches, and I've gone for Azure Blue or Cobalt Depths for obvious reasons, and Purple Dust because that tag out effect is very useful. So I decided to go for Instant Fusion here, and that allows us to go 1000 Yards Restrict, and as I was saying earlier on in the video, that plus a face down allows for us to have a spot to summon a Jack-Knight, so it's very, very useful. And then we activate the field spell that gives us that 300 boost, but also sets up the grave, which is going to be useful in a moment. So we move that away, and then we have Purple Dusk, which we tag out into another Golden Blossom, summon that, and then we use the effect to snatch that, because we still don't know what this is, so we can't rely on it being there for long. So by taking this monster and putting it on the back row, it means we will have options in the future. So we go to pop it, and again, this is why I set up the graveyard. We can, just so we can have some removal options, because that's one of the things that Jack-Knights need to do in order to make sure that they go ahead. Unfortunately, it turns out to be a Solemn Strike, but that's okay, because that's what we were planning to do in the first place. Now, the reason I summoned this is because I don't want it going to the grave in order to set up for a Dragon Buster on the next turn, which is why I choose to summon it. I make a small mistake here, and I don't read A Assault Core, which stops B Buster Drake when equipped from being destroyed, so this is a slight misplay on my behalf. But we have here, we go into the Link Robo, because again, the reason I run an extra Link Robo is so we can get around the restriction on 1000 Eyes Restrict. For whatever reason, it's in Spanish. Programs are weird. But essentially, when it's on the field, no other monster can attack. So by getting rid of that, we circumvent the effect. And basically just ABC, you know, Buster, Shenanigans, etc, etc. We do get quite a bit of damage on board. Not quite an OTK, which is unfortunate. It's what you would like. However, we now end on a turn of 4 monsters. This can utilize its effect on your opponent's turn, which is good because we have this face down, and this negates any monster effect that happens in the same column. So we have that ready to go. So we'll let the ABC player go here, doing their shenanigans as usual. And yeah, it drops the Gamma Seal, which is okay. But this is why you always have, if you can help it, you always have a Jack-Knight in one of these columns. Because what I'm going to do here is chain this, summon that, and because this is now face up on the field, Dragon Buster's effect is now negated, so he can't actually do anything. And he surrenders. So that just goes over some of the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. It's very easy to swarm, as you can see. But as you could also see, it can be interrupted rather easily. And that is what you shall see, I believe, in this replay. Actually, no, sorry. That is in the replay 3. You'll see how the deck deals with interruption. But here, for those who haven't seen it, is the Grinder Golem combo. So, like I said earlier on in this video, you can summon 2 tokens to summon him to your opponent's field. But what this essentially means is you have token fodder. So, Link Karibo and Link Spider summon a Kashik, bounce Grinder, do it again, summon Security, use Security's effect to bounce it again, summon another 2 tokens, summon Grinder, revive Link Karibo, and then go into your Skull Deet, I've heard some people call it. However, because I've summoned it with 4 materials, I get its last effect, so I draw 4, which you can see is those 5 plus these 3 here. And yeah, I send back these 3 because in our hand we've got Draw Power, Future Glow is ready to go as well, Instant Fusion so we can snatch back our Grinder Golem so we don't have to worry about him having a 3k beta, as well as the Field Spell for some potential Draw Power. So we do that, get the Draw Power, get Key, which is very important. Again, that's the combo I was talking about earlier with 7 stars. By banishing, we can then get it back with Key, so it essentially becomes a free pot of greed, so to speak. But then yeah, we banish Future Glow, that gets that off, and we basically just do the standard shenanigans. Monster removal into Link Karibo, which is really good, and this is why this is why I like running Future Glow, because if you banish either a 7 or an 8, you're turning every single Jack-Knight monster into a 3k plus beta. Obviously, just straight betas aren't as good as they once were, but they are still a force to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, that is one of the weaknesses of the deck, as you just saw there, Regeki. None of them, aside from the Link monster, have any real inbuilt protection. So that can be an issue if you don't have the means to negate their cards. So as you can see, we're going against a Dark Lord player. They're going to do that. I chain this because why not? But we're just going to let the Dark Lord player do their shenanigans. And yeah, they're just going to go off basically. Again, this is why I like Future Glow. Because in a standard situation, I would only have, what, 2700 here? But I have 4100 attack, which is more than this Dark Lord player would be able to get over. And as you can see here, makes a mistake because it's a mandatory effect on number 23. So as you can see down the bottom there, oops. I believe the Dark Lord player was probably still learning how to play the deck, but it does go a long way of showing, how the Jack-Knights are quite weak in some aspects. As you can see here, just going through, summoning a bunch of monsters, but this is why, and this shows why Future Glow, I reckon, is something that should be considered. Because essentially, I would have lost. I would have pretty much lost here if I didn't have Future Glow boosting this up to 4100. Because I wouldn't have been able to attack. I mean, do I have a... Yeah, see, I don't even have another Link Karibo. I would have been stuck. But because I have the 4100 attack, we are fine. Nothing I can do, and then I think she just gives up here. He, she, don't know who it is, but gives up, doesn't use Borrowload's effect. That could have resulted in going a different way, but in the end, doesn't matter. On to the next replay. And here, you'll get to see how it goes against a lot of disruption. So again, here, when you're playing Jack-Knights, you need to consider, okay, what form of interruption could they have? So 2 face downs and 2 cards in hand means the possibility for, again, some solemn strikes or solemn warnings and some hand traps. As you're about to see, we get hit by everything. Trade in, get the draws, which is okay. Search the field spell. Again, we want that boost in hand, and because we have Flickering Flame, we're able to discard to get more draws. However, again, we get hit by the Solemn Strike, which sucks. But at this point, I was thinking, okay, you know, we've got rid of the 2 back row. We should be okay to go through with Grinder, which is why I kept him around instead of discarding him for trade in to get the free Skull Deet. But Ghost Ogre, which sucks. So again, using that Jackknight effect, which is why I had the field spell for that discard, sets up the grave and allows us to pop a card and then destroy Grinder Golem in combat. Now, for whatever reason, maybe extra deck space, I don't know, the opponent didn't summon Utopia Lightning with 4 materials, would have been very helpful. And here again, another hand trap in Max C. And again, drawing into that future glow to set up. At this point, you know, I was fairly confident, even though I discarded Verdant Gale. At that point, I was fairly confident that he wasn't going to get too much over me. Fortunately, we top deck into True Depths, which is going to set us up to bring back the Crimson Lotus with 4200 attack, which is fantastic. And the reason I summoned him here, just to show a bit of interaction and some of the forethought that needs to go into playing this deck, we know that this card is in the graveyard. So if it was to be destroyed by a card effect, we want to make sure that that is already out of play, because at this point in time, we don't know what future plays he might have. So by putting it in the same column, we can get rid of that protection when it's not needed, and that way when it might have been needed further down the line, they didn't have it. And again, another Ghost Ogre, which is ridiculous. But to get rid of that protection and destroy Utopia, again, because we want to get as much off the field as possible, but he just surrenders. So even though we were playing it careful and making sure that he wouldn't have had any protection come the next turn, in the end it wasn't too bad at all. So the final replay, and it's kind of ironic that I'm showing this replay about, and this is going to come out about a week after Rata Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! Posted the Archetype Archive for Crystal Beasts, because that's exactly who we're facing. And this replay shows just how much power the deck has when you get a good hand and when you are not interrupted. So here we go. Blue Sky searches those 2. Again, terraforming into the field spell. We'll use the field spell again to discard itself, but also Azure Blue allows us to move that out of the way because we know we've got the 2 there. Again, more Skuldiat Grinder Golem shenanigans, because at this point we were fairly certain, okay, probably doesn't have anything like hand trap wise or anything like that, because again, it is Crystal Beasts. And again, that 4 draw, you know, return 3 is fantastic. So yeah, basically we just set up the field and go from there. We end up discarding Verdant Gale to get that extra draw. We get the Blue Sky to set up for the next turn in case it's needed. Pop the Grinder Golem so it's not in the way, and continue on from there. There's not much that can be done, as that is the OTK. But this is something that I love doing, because at this point as well, if we wanted to, we could go into World Scars, you know, to sort of have protection for the next turn, because again, we have 3 monsters that we can summon on next turn, including a summon off of Skuldiat, which would have been perfectly fine. But anyway, guys, that I hope showed some of the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. And yeah, I shall send you back to myself and we shall wrap this video up. And so that covers everything. If you're watching the end of the video, then I would just like to say thank you so much for watching this little experiment of mine. If you enjoyed it, then please remember to leave a like on the video and hit the sub button. It really helps to motivate me. Also, if you have any suggestions on decks you would like to see covered in the future, then please leave a comment suggesting ones that you would like to see done. Once again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please check out the current Skyrim Let's Play I'm running on the channel if you're interested. Anyway, until next time, ladies and gents, this has been the Sage, signing out.